Have you ever noticed how fear has a way of whispering in the dark? It doesn't always come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes it arrives quietly, sitting beside a hospital bed, clinging to the edge of silence, pressing on the chest like a weight you can't lift. A fear. It is a language all of us speak. A child feels it in the dark. An adult feels it when the phone rings at midnight. And the elderly feel it most when they wonder if tomorrow will come. But what if I told you that sometimes fear doesn't end with courage or medicine or answers? Sometimes it ends with a single act of kindness. Not an army, not a miracle, just one embrace from a stranger's shoulder. His name was Michael Turner, 50, 3 years old. A man who lived most of his life behind quiet doors. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, he wasn't someone the world would ever notice. Michael worked at a local hardware store. Every morning, he would unlock the door, straighten the shelves, and greet customers with a gentle smile. Not because life was perfect, but because he believed in carrying himself with dignity. No matter what storms raged inside, he lived alone in a modest apartment, the kind where the wallpaper had begun to peel, and the ceiling fan made a tired squeak at night. Once, long ago, he had a wife. Her name was Rebecca. But fate can be crueler than we expect. She passed away in her 30s, leaving Michael with a silence so deep. He learned to fill it with work. There were no children, no photographs of family dinners, just one framed picture of Rebecca on the kitchen table. Her smile, his only companion on lonely evenings. Neighbors knew him as polite, the man who would carry groceries for an old lady, the man who never raised his voice, the man who always said, "God bless you," to strangers he'd never see again. But inside, Michael lived with a weight most of us pretend we don't carry, the weight of being forgotten, of knowing that if tomorrow he didn't wake up, very few would notice, and even fewer would care. He prayed each night, quietly, asking God for strength, not for wealth, not for glory, but simply for the courage to keep going. Life has a way of testing the quiet ones the most. For Michael Turner, the tests didn't arrive with loud announcements. They arrived in the stillness of nights, when the walls of his apartment seemed to close in, and the clock on the wall mocked him with every second that passed. There was something about silence, something cruel about it. It didn't just stay outside. It crawled inside your chest, echoing questions you didn't want to answer. Why am I still here? Does anyone notice my absence? Is this what life was meant to be? Just work, sleep, and wait. Michael often sat by the small wooden table in his kitchen, a single lamp flickering overhead, Rebecca's photograph staring back at him. He would whisper, almost as if she could still hear him, "I miss you, Becca. I don't know how much longer I can do this." And yet, every morning, he pulled himself out of bed, put on the same brown jacket, and went back to the hardware store. Because sometimes, routine was the only thread keeping a man from falling apart. But life is fragile. And one winter morning, Michael collapsed behind the counter. It started with a dizziness he ignored, a shortness of breath he pretended wasn't there. And then, the world tilted. The sound of hammers and nails fell silent, and all he saw was the ceiling light above him, blurring into white. When he opened his eyes, he was in a hospital bed. The beeping of machines surrounded him. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the cold, white walls whispered a truth he had been trying to outrun. He was not well. Doctors came and went, their words carrying the weight of reality. A weak heart, complications, a body that had been ignored for too long. But what struck Michael the hardest wasn't the diagnosis. It was the silence of the room around him. No one sat by his bed. No one held his hand when the nurse inserted needles. No familiar voice came rushing when the doctor said, "One may need surgery soon." He looked to his left, saw the empty chair, and felt a tear slide down his face. Fear. It was no longer a whisper. It was a roar inside his chest. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of dying alone. For nights, he stared at the ceiling, machines beeping beside him, wondering if anyone outside these hospital walls even knew he was here. He prayed again, like he always did. "Lord, I don't ask for much, but if it's my time to leave this world, please, don't let me leave alone. The hospital is a place where time moves differently." Minutes feel like hours and hours feel like days. Michael had been there for nearly 2 weeks. Nurses came and went with their gentle smiles. Doctors explained reports with heavy voices. But once they left, the silence returned. The kind of silence that crushes a man's spirit. One evening, as the winter sun was setting behind the tall glass windows of the ward, Michael sat upright in his bed, his body frail, his hands trembling from both weakness and fear. The nurse had just told him the surgery would be scheduled soon. High risk, the doctor had said. 2 words that echoed like thunder inside his chest. Michael lowered his head, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he broke down. Tears ran freely down his weathered face. He whispered Rebecca's name, as if somehow she could still come back and sit beside him. But instead of Rebecca, a different presence entered the room. A woman, someone Michael had never met before. She looked to be in her late 30s, wearing a plain coat, carrying a small bag of books. She was a volunteer, one of those quiet souls who visited patients, just to make sure no one felt forgotten. She paused at the door, saw the tears streaming down his face, and without a word, walked closer. Michael noticed her, quickly wiping his eyes, embarrassed to be seen so vulnerable. I'm sorry, he stammered. I didn't mean to. But before he could finish, the woman gently placed her bag on the chair and did something he never expected. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. For a moment, Michael froze. It felt unfamiliar, to be held again. To feel another heartbeat against his chest. And then, something inside him broke. All the walls he had built around his loneliness, all the fear he had buried deep in silence, came rushing out, and he wept. He wept, not like a grown man, but like a child who had been lost for too long. His head fell against her shoulder, his tears soaking her coat. And still, she held him, not saying a word, not asking a question, just holding him. And in that embrace, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in years. Safety. Warmth. The reminder that he wasn't alone. The machines continued to beep. The world outside continued to move, but in that small hospital room, time stood still. Fear had been whispering to him for weeks, but in that single moment, fear was replaced. Not by medicine, not by answers, but by the simple weight of kindness, resting on a stranger's shoulder. The surgery came, as all storms eventually do. The night before, Michael still trembled with uncertainty, but something had changed inside him. He wasn't alone anymore. That stranger, the woman with the quiet strength, had returned the next morning, waiting by his bed with the same calm presence. When the doctors wheeled him toward the operating room, Michael didn't feel like a forgotten man anymore. He felt seen. He felt remembered. And he carried that hug inside his chest, like armor stronger than fear. The operation was long. Hours passed. But when Michael opened his eyes again, he saw her smile through the blur of the hospital lights. And for the first time in years, he smiled back. He realized then, kindness doesn't just heal the body, it heals the soul. The surgery never came. Michael's body grew weaker with each passing night. But something miraculous had still happened. The woman, the stranger who held him, returned every evening. She read him short prayers, held his hand when the machines beeped louder, and reminded him, without saying it aloud, that he was not forgotten. One night, as snow fell outside the hospital window, Michael whispered softly, "Thank you for letting me not be afraid." And with his head resting gently against her shoulder, his breathing slowed, and in that peace, he slipped away. But here's the truth: Michael did not die alone. He did not die afraid, because one simple act of kindness had replaced fear with love. It wasn't medicine that eased Michael's final moments. It was the kindness of a stranger's shoulder that replaced fear with peace.